Daddy, Mom says you can't come.
Get back in your car, Shane. Don't make a scene in front of the kids.
Those are my children. Why is Micah's suitcase in that trunk? Shane Doyle? You've been served. It's all in there. Micah, look at me. What did your mom tell you this morning?
She said we're staying with her for a while. She said you'd understand.
I filed this morning, Shane. Temporary custody until the hearing. My lawyer says it's cleaner this way. Cleaner.
You've had your law license barely a year, and you're already using that word about your own kids?
I'm doing what's best for them. Someday you'll see that.
For 3 years, I worked double shifts so you could pass the bar. Please, don't take my kids like this.
Don't, Shane. Not in front of them.
Lucy pressed her hand flat to the back window, and Shane touched 2 fingers to the glass to meet it. Then the SUV pulled away, and he was alone in the driveway, holding a court summons, the smell of the grill still on him. He did not sit down on the step. He had not sat down in 3 years. He went to work on the problem because that was the only thing he had ever known how to do. Here is what a stranger would need to understand about what drove out of that driveway. 6 years earlier, Bethany had spread a law school acceptance letter on their kitchen table and cried because they could not afford it, not on a cook's paycheck with 2 small kids. Shane, who had never gone to college, who worked a flat-top grill at the Halverson Diner off the interstate in southern Ohio, told her they would find a way. The way turned out to be doubles. For 3 straight years, he clocked in at 10 at night, cooked through the dark, clocked out at noon, and was standing in the school pickup line by the time the bell rang, eyes stinging from no sleep, always there. He made the lunches at midnight. He learned fractions on 3 hours of sleep. On the kitchen wall, he kept a big paper calendar and wrote their whole lives on it in his blocky hand, every game and loose tooth and field trip, so nothing his children needed would ever slip through. He never let her feel the weight of it. He mailed the tuition himself so she would never see the number. And when she crossed the stage in her cap and gown, he stood in the back with Lucy on his shoulders and clapped until his palms hurt, prouder than he had ever been of anyone alive. He thought he was building something they would share. He did not understand until a black SUV pulled away from his curb that he had built the exact thing that was now going to be used to take his children, and that for a long time only one of them had still been showing up. That night, after he found Micah's spare inhaler still in the bathroom cabinet and Lucy's stuffed rabbit still on her bed, he sat at the kitchen table and opened the envelope. He was not a man who read legal paper easily. The word swam, but he had spent 20 years reading a grill full of tickets during a rush, keeping 10 orders straight in his head at once, and he had learned to slow down and take a thing 1 line at a time. He read the petition 3 times. Bethany was asking for sole, legal, and physical custody. And buried in the 4th page, in language he had to read aloud under his breath to understand, was the part that made the floor drop out from under him. She was asking the court's permission to relocate the children to Denver, Colorado, where Blake Harmon's firm was opening an office and had offered her a partnership track. 1,200 miles. Ohio to Colorado? That was the number that mattered, not the custody, the distance. She did not simply want the children more than he had them. She wanted them somewhere he could not drive to on a Tuesday. A cook's wages do not buy many round-trip flights across the country. She was not asking to be the better parent. She was asking to make him into a voice on a phone, a card at Christmas, a man the children would slowly, gently, over years of distance, forget the shape of. He understood then that this had never been a fight he could win by being sadder or by being right. It was going to be a fight about who the court believed. And the court, he already knew, was going to walk into that room and see a woman in a tailored suit who spoke its language like a native, and a man in a diner apron who did not. The whole machine was built to believe her. He had helped build that too. The first temporary order gave him the children every other weekend and 1 dinner a week, and the first of those dinners nearly finished him. He met them at a chain restaurant Bethany had chosen, neutral ground, with a paid supervisor 2 tables away taking notes, because the declaration had suggested he might be a danger to his own kids. Lucy climbed into his lap and would not let go of his shirt. Micah sat across the booth, too careful and too quiet, the way a child goes when he has been told that everything he says might be repeated. Shane spent the whole hour just being easy, telling the same dumb jokes, cutting Lucy's chicken the way she liked it, asking Micah about his season, doing everything he could to make 60 Minutes feel like the old normal so his children would remember the normal had been real. When it was over, he buckled Lucy into her mother's car and hugged his son, and Micah held on a beat too long and whispered, fast, that Mom had a lawyer helping her, and that she was making him and Lucy practice what to tell the judge, and that he didn't want to go to Denver, and then he was gone before Shane could answer. The hardest part was the phone. Bethany allowed a short call most nights, on speaker, and Lucy would press her mouth right up to the receiver the way small children do and ask him when she was coming home, and he had to find a way every single night to answer that without lying to her and without breaking her heart or his own. He told her soon. He told her Daddy was working on it. He told her to leave the rabbit on the bed so it would be waiting. And when Micah got on, the boy would go quiet and careful again, because someone was always listening. So Shane learned to say the important things sideways, to fit, "I'm proud of you, and I'm not going anywhere," into the spaces between the safe words, and to trust that his son could read him the way you read someone you love, in the white space around what they are allowed to say. The attorney's supporting declaration arrived a week later, and it was worse than the petition because it was specific. Bethany had signed a sworn statement, under penalty of perjury, painting a portrait of Shane as an absent and unreliable father. He was, she swore, a man consumed by his work, gone at all hours, a stranger to his own children's schedules. And then, because she was a good lawyer, and good lawyers know that detail persuades, she listed incidents, specific ones, with dates. She swore that on a Friday, the previous October, he had forgotten to pick Lucy up from kindergarten and the school had called her at the firm, forcing her to leave a client meeting. She swore that in March he had shown up to Micah's band concert visibly impaired, smelling of alcohol, and had to be asked to step outside. She swore that across the spring he had left the children home alone for whole nights while he worked, a 6-year-old and a 12-year-old, unsupervised. She built a man out of those dates, a drunk, negligent, absent man. And she signed her name under it in the confident hand of someone who had decided that the story she needed was more important than the story that was true. Shane read the dates, and something in his chest that had been collapsing for a week stopped collapsing and went very still, because he knew, with the bone certainty of a man who had lived those exact days, that every one of them was a lie. And more than that, he knew something Bethany, in her new suits and her new life, had forgotten that he knew. He knew that everything he had done for 3 years had been counted, not by him, by a machine. Because a cook does not simply show up. A cook punches a clock. For 3 years, every shift Shane Doyle ever worked at the Halverson Diner began with him pressing his thumb to a little gray time clock by the walk-in cooler, and ended with him pressing it again, and each press stamped a date and a minute onto a record that the diner kept for payroll and taxes and did not throw away. A time clock does not know your name and does not care about your marriage. It never learned how to love you, and it never learned how to lie. It only keeps every hour you were exactly where you said you were, doing the thing that nobody claps for. On the Friday in October that Bethany swore he had abandoned Lucy at school, the time clock would show that Shane had clocked out at 11:52 in the morning, driven straight to the elementary school, and signed Lucy out at 12:20 in the afternoon in his own hand on the office log, because he was always the one who signed her out. On the March night she swore he had shown up drunk to a concert, the time clock would show him on the overnight shift, on the grill, 40 minutes across the county, nowhere near the school, stone sober and working. She had reached for specifics to make herself unassailable. She had not stopped to remember that the man she was describing had spent 3 years being time-stamped. He drove to the diner the next morning before his shift and found the one person in that building who could open the door on all of it. Her name was Ramona Tate, and she was near 60, and she had run the books and the payroll at the Halverson Diner for longer than Shane had been alive, sitting in a windowless back office that everyone walked past. Waitresses came and went, cooks came and went, managers came and went and took the credit. Ramona stayed, and she kept every record because keeping records was the one thing the world had ever let her be good at, and she was very good at it. Nobody ever thought to ask Ramona Tate anything. That, it would turn out, was the most expensive assumption anyone in this story made. Shane laid the declaration on her desk and asked her a simple question. He asked whether the diner still had his time records for the last 3 years. Ramona put on her reading glasses and read the sworn statement slowly, all the way to the bottom, and when she looked up, her face had changed in the particular way a decent person's face changes when they realize they are looking at a lie about someone they respect. "Shane, I don't just have 3 years," she said. "I have 7. I have every card you ever punched. I could tell you what you ran on the grill on a Tuesday 2 Aprils ago." She tapped the declaration with one finger. "And I can tell you that whoever wrote this has never once looked at a time clock in her life, or she wouldn't have been fool enough to put dates on it." That was the moment the ground shifted back under Shane Doyle, an inch at a time. He did not have a lawyer's voice. He did not have Blake Harmon's money or Bethany's tailored certainty. But he had a machine that had been quietly witnessing his whole sacrifice for 3 years, and a woman the world had walked past for 40. And between the two of them, they had something that no closing argument could talk its way around. They had the dates. If you have ever poured yourself out for somebody, hour after unseen hour, and watched them use the very strength you gave them as the reason to leave you behind, stay with this, because the thing that finally protected Shane Doyle was not a clever argument or a lucky break. It was the plain, stubborn, unglamorous record of a man who kept showing up when no one was watching. But knowing the truth and surviving a family court are two different animals. The court sent them to a custody evaluator, a soft-voiced psychologist named Dr. Renner, who, Shane would only learn later, did a good deal of paid expert work for attorneys tied to Blake Harmon's firm. Renner asked him to describe a normal day, and Shane tried to explain the overnight shifts and the noon pickups, and he watched the man's pen slow and then stop, and he understood the trap all at once. Renner had already heard these same facts from Bethany, turned inside out. A father who works nights so his days are free, and a father who is simply never home, are built from the identical bricks. It only matters who gets to lay them. And this was a room that had already decided whose hands to trust. So he said almost nothing, and lost the appointment on purpose. Out in the parking lot afterward, Blake Harmon shook his hand like a man who has never lost anything he wanted, and told him, kindly, that children were resilient, that video calls were wonderful now, that a good father would not trap his kids in a dying river town when they could have every advantage. Shane thanked him for the advice, because Micah had once told him that yelling only made things worse, and the boy had been right. Then he drove to the diner and worked a double, because this fight, like the last one, was going to be paid for in hours. He found a lawyer he could halfway afford, a tired legal aid attorney with too many files, and together they began the slow work of turning 3 years of punch cards into a weapon. Ramona pulled every record. They matched each timestamp against each sworn incident, and one by one, the incidents died. They worked at the diner's back table after closing, 3 of them under a hanging lamp, Ramona with her file boxes and her steel-rimmed glasses, the lawyer with a legal pad, and Shane with the sworn declaration he had come to know, line by line, the way he knew a rush of tickets. Ramona would read a date off Bethany's statement, then walk her thick fingers back through the cards until she found the one that mattered, and she would lay it on the table and read the times out loud in a voice with no drama in it at all. And each time she did, another sentence of the declaration quietly died on the pad. It took 4 nights. When they were done, the lawyer sat back and looked at the 2 neat columns, the sworn story and the stamped truth, and said, almost to himself, that in 11 years he had never had a client hand him a case this clean, and that it was a shame it belonged to a man who had earned it the hardest way there is. Shane did not answer. He was looking at a punch card from a Friday in October at 12:20 in the afternoon, and thinking about a small hand pressed flat against the back window of a car. There was one card that did more than clear him. Bethany had sworn that on that Friday in October, the school called her at the firm, and she left a client meeting to rush over and handle it. But when the lawyer subpoenaed the school's phone records, there was no call to Bethany logged at all. Not that day, not any day. The only contact on file for either child every single time was Shane. The detail she had invented to make herself the hero of the story turned out to be one more thing that had never happened. She had not only erased him from the record, she had quietly written herself into a chair she had never once sat in. The lawyer found something else when he pulled Dr. Renner's history, the way you check a cook's references. Renner had been hired as the paid evaluator or expert in a long string of custody cases, and in more than a few of them, the attorney signing his checks had been someone at Blake Harmon's firm. It did not prove the man had lied. It only explained the warm office and the slow pen, and why a father who worked nights had walked in, already convicted. The scale had a thumb on it. Now they could see whose. But the punch cards, as strong as they were, told only half the story. The half about where Shane had been. They did not tell the court where the children had actually been, or who had actually raised them. And for that, Shane needed something he did not want to touch, which was the children themselves. The court had appointed a guardian ad litem, a woman named Frances Osborne, whose job was not to represent either parent, but to represent the children's own interest and report to the judge what she found. Frances Osborne was blunt and gray-haired and unimpressed by everyone, and when she first sat down with Shane, she made it clear she had seen 100 fathers claim to be wronged and that he would have to show her, not tell her. She spent time with the children, and it was in her quiet interviews, away from both parents, that the second wall of the case came down, because Frances Osborne asked Micah a simple question about whether he ever felt unsafe. And Micah, 12 years old and carrying more than a 12-year-old should ever carry, began to cry. He told her the truth. He told her that in the days before they left, his mother had sat him and Lucy down and told them what to say if a judge or a counselor ever asked. She had told them to say they were scared of their father. She had told them it was to keep everyone safe, and that it was the kind of thing that was true, even if it did not feel true. And Micah had tried. He really had, because he was afraid of what would happen if he did not do what his mother said. But sitting in front of this gray-haired woman who kept looking at him like his answer actually mattered, he could not make the words come, because they were not true. And his father had taught him, in the plainest terms a cook knows, that you do not send out a plate that is a lie. "I'm not scared of my dad," Micah told Frances Osborne. "My dad is the one who's always there. Mom told us to say it, but I can't. He didn't do anything." Frances Osborne told Shane what his son had said, not because she was required to, but because she had watched the boy carry it and thought the father should know. He had finally set it down. She expected the father to be glad. Most were. Instead, Shane sat very still, and then he put his face in his grill-scarred hands for a moment. Not because he had won something, but because he was picturing his 12-year-old alone in a room being asked to choose between his mother and the truth, carrying that choice by himself because both his parents had been too busy fighting to carry it for him. When he looked up, he did not ask how they could use it. He asked whether Micah was okay. Frances Osborne had been doing this work for 20 years, and she made a quiet note of the order of his two questions, because the order in which a parent asks them tells you almost everything you need to know. Here is the thing that separated Shane Doyle from the people who had taken his children, and it is the thing this whole story turns on. When his lawyer heard what Micah had told the guardian, he was elated, because coaching a child to lie to the court is not a small thing. It is the kind of thing that does not just lose a custody case. It can end a legal career, trigger a bar investigation, and follow a person for the rest of their life. His lawyer wanted to put Micah on the stand. He wanted the boy to say it out loud, in the courtroom with his mother sitting 10 feet away. And he was right that it would be devastating. And he was right that it would probably win the case outright. And Shane said no. He said no because he had watched his son cry, telling a stranger the truth. And he understood that making Micah say it again in front of his mother to help destroy her would be a wound that boy would carry for the rest of his life. Shane had spent 3 years making sure his children never had to pay for the choices the adults around them made. He was not going to stop now, not even to win, not even against the woman who had felt no such hesitation about using them. He told his lawyer that Micah would not testify against his mother. He would find another way, or he would lose the right way, but he was not going to save his family by breaking his son to do it. Micah heard about it, the way kids hear about everything, and one night he came and stood in the kitchen doorway and said he would do it. He would tell the judge what Mom did. He said it with his jaw set, trying to be a man about it, and Shane saw exactly what it was costing the boy just to make the offer, and that was the whole reason the answer was no. He sat his son down. He told him it was the bravest thing anybody had offered him in a year, and that he was not going to allow it. Because it was not a 12-year-old's job to take a parent apart, not even a parent who had earned it. Your only job, he told him, is to tell the truth if a grown-up asks you straight, and otherwise to let the grown-ups carry the rest, Micah argued. Shane held. In the end, the boy leaned into him the way he had not done since he was small, and neither of them said anything else, because nothing else needed saying. His lawyer thought he was a fool. Frances Osborne, when she heard about the decision, did not. She had spent 20 years watching parents use children as weapons in exactly these rooms, and she had almost never watched one refuse the weapon when it was placed in his hand. She wrote that down too. Guardians ad litem are supposed to be neutral, but neutral does not mean blind, and Frances Osborne had just watched a diner cook protect the very child he could have used to win, and she had watched a licensed attorney coach that same child to lie, and she was not a person who confused the two. The plan they built, in the end, was the plain one, the only kind that survives a room full of people who are certain they already know who you are. Shane's lawyer would not attack Bethany. He would not need to. He would simply, quietly, put the sworn declaration up on one side and the time records up on the other, and let the court do the arithmetic. He would take each specific, dated lie and lay Ramona Tate's records beside it, and let the dates speak in the flat, uncaring voice of a machine that had no stake in any of it. And Frances Osborne would deliver her own report to the judge on what she had found, in her own time, in her own way, so that the ugliest truth, the coaching, would come from the neutral officer of the court, and not from the mouth of a frightened child. The danger was real up to the last minute, because Bethany was not a cartoon, and Blake Harmon did not lose gracefully. 2 nights before the hearing, Bethany came to the house alone. It was the first time she had stood in that kitchen since the SUV, and for a moment, seeing her there, Shane saw the woman who had cried at that same table over an acceptance letter 6 years before. She did not raise her voice either. She told him she knew he had the diner records. She told him that if he humiliated her in that courtroom, if he made her out to be a liar in front of a judge, she would appeal, and appeal again, and that a man on a cook's salary could not outspend Blake Harmon's firm across years of motions, and that all he would accomplish was to bleed himself dry and drag the children through more of it. She told him to take the settlement, the every other weekend, and the alternating holidays, and let her go to Denver with the kids and be grateful. And then, at the end, the mask slipped for just a second, and she said the truest thing she said in the whole business. "I clawed my way out, Shane. You have no idea what it took. I am not going back to a life that smells like a fryer, and I am not raising them in one either." And Shane understood, finally, all of it. He understood that she had grown up terrified of being poor, that she had married a kind man who made her feel safe, and that the moment she had a way up and out, she had come to see him not as the person who lifted her, but as the weight she had climbed off of. He understood that she had convinced herself that money was the same thing as love, because someone had taught her that a long time ago, probably before he ever met her. He was not without pity for her, but pity is not the same as surrender, and these were his children. "You didn't claw out alone," he said. "You climbed a ladder I stood in the dark and held. I never asked you to be grateful. I just asked you not to kick it over with our kids still on it." He opened the door for her. "I'll see you Thursday." He did not sleep. He sat at the kitchen table with 3 years of punch cards in a shoebox on one side, and, on the other, the month's bills fanned out under the lamp, the electric, the water, the truck payment, and he counted what was in his wallet twice, the way a cook counts a bad night's tips. Blake Harmon could file motions until the kids were grown. That was the fear the threat had found, not losing the hearing, but winning it, and being bled dry across years of appeals until the fighting was all any of them remembered. He had the truth. He was not sure the truth could outlast a checkbook. It was Ramona who set him straight, over coffee before a shift. He was thinking like a man who expected to be believed, she said, and men, like the two of them, did not get to expect that. The only move left was to make the record so plain that being believed was not required. Lay the dates down, let the machine talk. It does not get tired, and it does not run out of money. And it was there every single night, which was more than she could say for the woman in the suit. 6 weeks after the black SUV, the hearing was held in the family court on the 3rd floor of the county building, a plain room with fluorescent lights and a flag and a judge named Corman who had heard 10,000 of these and expected to have heard everything. Bethany sat at her table in a charcoal suit, flanked by 2 attorneys from Blake Harmon's firm, and she looked exactly as Shane had feared, like the obvious answer to the question the room was there to decide. Shane sat beside his overworked legal aid lawyer in the one collared shirt he owned, and the judge's first glance at the 2 of them did the thing he knew it would do, which was to file him under the word most people had always filed him under, which was less. Bethany's side went first, and they were good. They painted stability and opportunity and a mother's devotion, and they read from the declaration, the absent father, the missed pickups, the concert. It was a clean, professional performance, and Shane watched the judge nod along the way. Tired judges nod at the story they have already decided is probably true. One of Bethany's attorneys turned and asked, almost as an aside, whether it was true that Mr. Doyle worked more than 80 hours some weeks and let the number hang there in the fluorescent light. Shane felt the whole room do the arithmetic the wrong way, felt himself become, in that instant, exactly the absent man the paper had sworn he was. His own lawyer started to answer. Shane put a hand on his sleeve and told him, quietly, to let it go. Let them put the hours on the record, he said. We are going to need the hours. Then it was Shane's lawyer's turn, and he did not stand up and make a speech. He asked to enter into the record the certified payroll and time records of the Halverson Diner, kept in the ordinary course of business, authenticated by the custodian of those records, who was present, and he called Ramona Tate. Ramona took the stand in her good cardigan, unimpressed by the flag and the lawyers and the whole apparatus, and she explained, in plain terms a jury of anybody would understand, what a time clock was and how it worked, and why a business kept the records and why they could not be after the fact invented. And then, one at a time, Shane's lawyer walked her through the dates. He read the sworn statement that on the Friday in October, Shane had abandoned Lucy at school, and Ramona read, from the certified record, the timestamp showing Shane had clocked out at 11:52 that morning, and she produced the school's own sign-out log, subpoenaed, with Shane's signature at 12:20, because Shane always signed her out. He read the sworn statement about the drunken concert in March, and Ramona read the timestamp putting Shane on the overnight grill, 40 minutes away, clocked in and working, at the exact hour the concert was taking place. She did it flatly. She did not argue. She just read the dates the machine had kept, and set them down next to the dates Bethany had sworn to, and let them sit next to each other in the fluorescent light. And it is a very long time. A set of contradicting dates in a silent courtroom. One by one, the specific incidents that had been built to make Bethany unassailable became, instead, a signed and sworn record of a woman who had told the court things that could not be true. She had reached for detail to persuade. The detail was now the noose. You cannot cross-examine a punch card. It has no motive. It was not there to help Shane Doyle. It was only ever there to help the diner make payroll, and it had, without meaning to, kept a perfect record of a father showing up. At 11:52, at 12:20, at 2 in the morning, for 3 years, while everyone assumed he was just a man who was always at work. The judge was no longer nodding. He was leaning forward, and he asked Bethany's attorneys, in the flat voice judges use when something has genuinely surprised them, to explain the discrepancy between the sworn declaration and the certified time records. And there was no explanation, because there is no explanation, because the dates were the dates. Blake Harmon's expensive attorneys did the only thing left to do, which was to object and to talk about the totality of the circumstances. But the room had turned, the way a room turns when it realizes it has been played, and everyone in it, including the judge, was now looking at the woman in the charcoal suit and recalculating everything she had said. Blake Harmon's lead attorney fought it, because that is what they are paid to do. He argued that a payroll clock could be wrong, that Shane could have punched in and slipped out, that a diner bookkeeper was hardly a forensic expert. And for a few minutes, he was smooth enough that the air in the room wavered. Then Shane's lawyer asked Ramona a single question. He asked whether the diner's clock took a thumbprint. It did. He asked whether anyone but Shane could have pressed Shane's thumb to it at 2 in the morning, 40 minutes from a school concert. Ramona looked at the attorney over her glasses as though he had asked whether the sun came up in the west, and said no, that this was rather the entire point of a thumb. Somewhere in the gallery, a sound escaped that was almost a laugh, quickly swallowed, and the wavering air went still, and it settled against Bethany and did not lift again. And then Frances Osborne delivered her report. She was calm, And she was brief, and she was neutral in the way that a scale is neutral, which is to say she simply reported the weight. She told the court that in her independent interviews, conducted away from both parents, she had found no evidence whatsoever that the children were unsafe with their father, and considerable evidence that he was their primary attachment and had been for years. And then she told the court, because it was her duty to report what she had found, that one of the children had disclosed to her, without prompting, that he had been instructed by his mother on what to say to the court, and specifically instructed to claim a fear of his father that the child, stated plainly, was not real. She did not editorialize. She did not have to. The sentence landed in that room like a dropped plate. Bethany did not cry, and she did not shout. Shane watched her face do the thing he had seen it do only once before, years ago, at a kitchen table over a letter she thought she could not afford to accept, which was to understand, all at once, the true size of what was in front of her. Whatever happened with the custody, she was an officer of the court who had just been found, by a neutral guardian and a payroll ledger, to have sworn falsely and coached her children to do the same. That did not stay in a family courtroom. That followed a license. Judge Corman did not rule from the bench in anger, because good judges do not. He took a recess, and when he came back, he spoke plainly. He found that the sworn declaration was contradicted by reliable business records on multiple material points. He found that the guardian ad litem's report raised grave concerns about the petitioner's conduct. He denied the request to relocate the children to Colorado outright. He granted primary physical and legal custody to Shane Doyle, with supervised and then, over time, unsupervised visitation for their mother, because a good judge knows that children need even a flawed parent, and because Shane's own lawyer, on Shane's explicit instruction, had asked the court not to sever the mother entirely. That instruction surprised the judge. It did not surprise Frances Osborne. She had seen it coming since the day a diner cook refused to put his son on a stand. The cost came due after, the way it always does, because winning is not the same as healing. Bethany faced a referral to the state bar, and the partnership in Denver evaporated the moment Blake Harmon understood she was now a liability instead of an asset. And Blake Harmon, who had never loved her, moved on with the speed of a man stepping off a boat he can feel beginning to sink. She was left with less than she had started with, having gambled her children and her license on a life that had already stopped wanting her the moment she stopped being useful. Shane took no pleasure in it. He had loved her once, really loved her, and there is no version of watching the mother of your children destroy herself that feels like winning, even when the alternative was losing your kids. The town talked, the way a small town talks, and for a while the talk ran the way it always ran. Sympathy for the polished lawyer and a raised eyebrow for the cook. Then, the real shape of it worked its way through the diner and the school and the bleachers, and slowly the talk turned. People who had walked past Shane Doyle for years, filing him under the word less, stopped him now at the counter to say they had always known he was a good father, and he took it the way he took everything, quietly and without correction, because he had never done a minute of it for their eyes, and he was not going to start needing them now. What mattered had never happened in front of the town. It had happened at a time clock at 2 a.m, and in a booth with a paid supervisor 2 tables away, and in a small gray room where a boy chose the truth. The people who had actually been there had never needed to be told. But the children came home. Micah came back into the house he had grown up in and slept, for the first time in weeks, all the way through the night. Lucy's stuffed rabbit went back on her bed. And on a Saturday morning not long after, Shane did the thing he had not been able to do in years, which was to work a single shift and come home in the afternoon light instead of the dark. Ramona had quietly gone to the owner and gotten him off the overnight doubles because, she said, a man ought to be able to see his own kids in the daytime, and because a bookkeeper who has kept your records for 3 years has a certain amount of pull she is not above using for a good cause. He hung a new calendar on the kitchen wall, a big paper one, and he wrote on it in his blocky cook's hand, the way he always had. Not for any court, not for any record, just for them. Micah's game, Saturday, 4 o'clock, Dad will be there. Lucy's tooth, the wiggly one, watch it. The dentist, the field trip, the small, unglamorous architecture of 2 children's lives, kept by the one person who had always kept it. Micah stood in the kitchen doorway, watching him write, the way he used to watch his mother letter the customers' names, and after a while, He said the thing that had been sitting in him for months. "I'm sorry I almost said it, Dad. The thing she told us to say." Shane put down the marker. He crouched down the way you kneel to meet a child at eye level, even a child who is nearly as tall as you now, and he put a scarred hand on the back of his son's neck. "You didn't say it. That's the whole thing. When it counted, you told the truth, and you told it to protect somebody instead of hurt them. That's the hardest thing a person ever learns to do, and you did it at 12. He looked at his boy. "Your mother made a bad choice. That's hers to carry, not yours. You are not the lie she told. You're the kid who couldn't tell it." Micah nodded and did not quite cry, and went to get his little sister for breakfast. Lucy came padding in a minute later in her socks, dragging the rabbit by one ear, and climbed into the chair that had always been hers, and asked what was on the calendar today. Shane read it to her the way he always had, in his flat cook's voice, like it was the most ordinary thing in the world. Because to a small child, the most healing thing is not a speech. It is the ordinary thing coming back. "Pancakes," he told her. Then Micah's game at 4. Then nothing at all, the whole evening. Nobody has to be anywhere. Lucy considered this as seriously as she considered everything, and decided it was a good day, and asked for the pancakes shaped like the letter L, the way he had made them, since before she could say her own name. He turned to the stove. He was home in the daytime, in the good light, with all the hours in front of him now, and for the first time in 3 years he did not have to spend a single one of them anywhere but here. A time clock never learned how to love you, and it never learned how to lie. For 3 years, Shane thought he was buying a woman a law degree. What he was really doing was keeping a record, in the one language a court will trust, that on every day someone would later swear he was gone. He was exactly where a father is supposed to be, on the grill so the light stayed on, or in the pickup line at 12:20, present, time-stamped, there. So if you are the one doing the quiet hours, the doubles, and the pickups, nobody photographs, know that it is being counted somewhere, even when it feels like no one sees. Send this to the person who did the hours no one saw, and tell them you saw.